Welcome to the 13th episode of the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking with Beth Konkoski, a talented English teacher, published author, and longtime experimenter in the classroom. Because Beth and I already know each other fairly well, we were already in the middle of discussing podcasts and how this whole process was going to go when I started rolling the tape. And we sort of stumbled into some good conversation before I'd really intended it. So we're just going to go ahead and pick up partway into our quick conversation about other podcasts we listen to and the goals for this one. Please enjoy this episode of the ClassCast Podcast.
Yeah, I was thinking, I've been email interviewed for stuff that's been in magazines and stuff. I've talked through interviews, but even then it's still turned into more of a transcript. And then I've been videotape interviewed a whole bunch of times. But I was like, oh, I've never actually
somebody asked her you ever want to start videotaping them? And I was like, I don't think so, because I feel like it makes people more cautious.
Maybe.
And,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think this is its own thing that really has a lot of kind of steam right now.
Yeah,
do you know what I'm saying?
I
I don't know that anyone would. I think when people would turn to them is when video is not really a reasonable accompaniment, right? I walk to it, I listen in the car, I can't really see.
Yeah. Well, and
anything,
for some of it, it's how entertaining is it to watch someone
people
sit there
talk.
anyway?
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
You have a face for podcasts.
But somebody asked, but somebody asked,
I
and I was like, I don't think so.
You don't have to be dressed.
And
People
talking to
worry
a
about
couple
their
of the,
makeup,
And talking to, I think it was actually one of the school board candidates I talked to, and they had asked about it, and I was like, no, I think it would just make people feel less comfortable. And then I realized with them especially that once the conversations were done, stop. Then they, 2 out of the 3 gave the impression I have somewhere to be, I have a limited amount of time. The one guy who was the one, he won, but he was just, hey, we're just here, we'll talk, we'll do whatever. He was very laid back about it. But they were like, oh, I've got to be out of here at a certain time, and sort of guarded stuff. And then it stops, and as soon as I unplugged it, we're hanging out for another half hour, and they're saying all this stuff where I'm like, and none of it was bad. None of it would have been bad.
Why wouldn't
But
they?
somehow, so it turns out we weren't in a rush, and there are things you wouldn't say on the record, none of which was actually concerning.
Interesting.
So the idea of putting it on camera, in my mind, would just create that much more of a put a guard up.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make sense. But people, those in particular, but some people in general, just once it's done, all of a sudden we have other stuff to talk about. I'm like,
isn't that weird?
we could have done that before I stopped it. So
that's interesting. I don't think of myself as someone who would change a lot when I stopped. But I don't know. Maybe I will. Maybe I will be like, oh, why didn't I don't know.
Yeah. Here and there, I find myself giving politically convenient answers for certain things where it's it is a school board issue or it's a superintendent thing. And it's where it's I'm going to be honest, but I'm only going to be honest to a point because in the end I still have a job.
Yeah,
I still need that job.
Yeah, it's never my goal to say something that's going to make people kind of so uncomfortable that they can't even wrap their, I'm not really going for shock value.
Right.
When I call kids snowflakes and they go I want them to, I want that to be a little bit jarring, but it's not really insulting.
Right.
It's I just want you to think about all the ways that, you don't take responsibility for yourself.
And if I want to question something, I want to question it, but I also need to stay within certain confines because when I'm questioning the people who are in charge of my paycheck,
right, exactly.
I have no advertisers, but I'm still beholden to someone.
That's true.
There is a limitation here. So
and it's interesting. And you may want to ask me about this anyway. But when you said to me, you've had several people who are sort of negative about school. I am very. I think institutions are big and they don't function terribly well, but I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep them and keep trying to, and that it's the individuals within institutions who actually function well. So
all right, so okay, so you did that, and all I normally do is a little quick intro. So I'll just record that later. We'll just sort of.
Well, I can say that again. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to steal your thunder.
No, it's
I just
perfect.
was
It's perfect.
about
I'll
that.
just delete the beginning off of that, and this can be where we start though. But so when we first talked about maybe doing a podcast early in the school year, I had said that I had recently talked with Jim Dunning, who we work with, and then a couple of former students, and all of them in one way or another had, I guess, negative probably misrepresents it, but like critical things to say of school. Not that anyone outright hates it, but there's a lot of concern either it's not doing what we want it to do, or talking to former students, there's a lot of concern that they're not using very much of it, which I think most people would agree with, right? And so, but when I brought up to you, you said, well, but I love school. Yeah. Like, there's value in class. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, good. Yeah. Because I'm stuck in the middle and I don't know, but like, is school worth it? Yeah. Like, in public school, I mean. Like, yeah. Why? Like, how?
I mean, I think that we have to continually reimagine what it's going to look like in terms of the physical space of it, which when I do that is when I find my greatest value. When I move kids out into a hallway and let them do things in a slightly different way. When I bag the traditional, let me teach them something and then give them a test on it, instead find a way to say, here's information that you're going to do something with, and I want you to engage with that information. I watch them enjoy what they're learning, and I watch them decide to take a lot of ownership to it. So I think it's really possible. I just think that the way we're still really trapped in some of the physical spaces of it and in the time of it, so that it still remains that sort of bell to bell, stop and start, interrupted time frame. And so, but working within that, I create moments that feel as if people are really digging into stuff that matters. Right. And the emails I get from students later suggest that they put to work what we've started. Yeah. So I feel like it's successful in that sense.
And that's so, and that has to do with, how we do it, like literally how we're running a class. And you think about the space, and I have very little to complain about. I'm treated well at work and the rest, but like I have the worst room possibly in the building, right? And so, so that's both like probably literally true, but it's also the joke. It's how it's how I know people don't like me. They stuck me in this closet, no windows, small room, no whatever else. So we're confined. But I actually talked to students about this 2 weeks ago. We were talking about school-related stuff, I think, in public speaking, and some of the kids who go to the academies, brand new building, it's gorgeous, and has all this like open space, like a lot of technology campuses have, like Google, or even the AOL campus up the road here had all these like cool like hangout spaces and free work areas. And the feedback was mixed, that at some points they get to use it. They have like these big like blackboard walls or dry erasers, and like you can, use the space, go learn, talk, all this collaboration stuff. And then some of the kids sort of responded that it looks cool, but they don't use it. They don't have it. Do you think changing the space itself is enough? Like, are we just going to age out and like younger people will teach and they'll do it better?
Maybe that will happen. I think we have to find a way to convince anyone joining this profession that it is okay to break that sort of, industrial model. Right. And that has to be an ongoing conversation. Like, it's okay. So when I send kids to go do a peer review, and they sit in those little cubbies, in the cafeteria, like, I'm comfortable with that. I know they're going to do, because they're going to come back and they're going to have done what I've asked them to do, and I've established a need for them to engage in those things. Right. And I do think if we treat younger teachers as if we want them to find ways to do those things, that will slowly start to happen. Principals are going to have to not need the kind of order that they sometimes need. Right. And, I think it's possible. Like, no one hassles me about the stuff that I do. They see my kids out wandering around doing the stuff I send them out to do. No one says anything about it. No one's ever worried about it. My freshmen have done it.
How long have you been at the school?
This is my 17th year at Broad Run. But I can tell you, by the first year, I was doing crazy stuff with go get dressed in your Chaucer pilgrim costume, and people were, they were, I was teaching 12th grade and doing those kinds of things. In fact, I just had a conversation with Brandon Wilbarger about it the other day because he was he's an English teacher at Tuscarora, and he's the football coach. Mm-hmm. And I just saw him the other day, and he said, "Oh my gosh, remember when we did all that Hamlet stuff, and I had my pilgrim costume," and he's an English teacher now, so right. I know we were doing those things even 17 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I just think sometimes we state a goal and then we respond, like we don't follow through entirely. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of talk about innovation, and then there's a lot of concern about, say, assessment or how you do all the rest of the stuff that doesn't match.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I think the institution of school wants quick fix. Right. They want things they can control. They want fast and measurable goals. And none of that stuff is going to give you any sort of real long-term benefits. So the only way, and one time when I worked with this whole bunch of stuff about students changing and teachers and constructivism and all sorts of things, it was years ago, and they talked about, you have to identify the people who are intrinsically motivated to change, the people who will change, when you make it sort of necessary and you put pressure on them to change, and then the people who never are going to. And you start with those intrinsically motivated people, and you give them some resources, and you give them an opportunity to start to change, and then it does slowly start to trickle down. It's just slow.
Yeah, have you read Tipping Point?
Yes,
no?
yes.
So
yes, you reached the tipping point.
There's the early adopters. I forget he breaks into 3 or 4 groups, and there's the people who just jump into new because it's new. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think we see a lot of that. I don't want to say a lot, but there are teachers probably in any school who just, it's new and they do it. Mm-hmm. And it's good, and I don't want to discourage it. But that's never me. Mm-hmm. Because it's new, or, it's just too fast, right? Uh-huh. And then you and so, for example, an easy example for me is with all of the different online tools and options we have. Yep. There was, first we had the online gradebook, and it's post your homework through a school website. Right. And then there's a Vision. What is Vision?
Vision Class, whatever.
Is that
it's
Moodle
it's like Blackboard or whatever.
Blackboard, one of the whatever. Right, we
that,
relabel everything, so it's hard to keep track of it. But then there was that. Then there's the next one, and then all of a sudden we're supposed to use the Microsoft Cloud. Yep. And then all of a sudden we're supposed to do Google Classroom. Right. And so for all of it,
and then we lose that next year.
But that's where it I think at certain points I'm trying to do good things, and trying not to be, stuck and do, but at the same time, when the rate of change goes too fast, or when too many people ask for too many things too quickly, for me, I feel like I've done the job long enough where I'm hesitant all the time. Yeah. Not because I don't want to do a better job, and there are a million ways I probably can. It's because I don't think anyone's making up their minds. Right. And so this year, for the first time ever, I'm posting nothing online. Yeah. Not be if you need something, email me. I check my email before I go to bed. Yeah. I email stuff back, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But there was no Google Classroom. Then it was optional, and then all of a sudden everybody was starting to do it. And I thought, I just don't. This doesn't feel like anyone knows what they want. Right. And now we just found out we're going to do, was it Schoology or and maybe we'll stick with that because it sounds like we're paying and it's legit. But every time you think about how to do school better, or how do we update the industrial model, you get the new thing because it's new and flashy, and you get the safe thing, and there's probably a way to do both. There's probably a way to do, or maybe do neither, but something that would work.
Really, what you need to do is agree that what we do has elements of art to it. Right. And you aren't going to go out and tell sculptors and painters that you must use X. Everybody has to look the same. Right. And yet continually the institution of school wants us, because it's easier, to march in the same rows. And
very
that removes...
Consistent process, consistent product.
So things make sense to me because of my personality. Right. And who I decide my students are, and I lay my classroom out that way. And so it's almost as if, and this is the part that frustrates me sometimes, as an institution, they don't necessarily trust that teachers are equipped to make the best choices. It's a little Harrison Bergeron, right?
Yeah.
We gotta bring everybody down to the bottom. We gotta make you all the same so that we can trust that the best possible thing at the lowest level is happening. And I think if you give people opportunity and then you spend administrative time working with the people who aren't meeting those goals, then you're going to develop a better school. And I would argue, for the most part, Broad Run does that. I mean, I think for the most part, if you show yourself to be someone who knows what you're doing and you're making smart choices and they're good for kids, in my 17 years, no one has hassled me about the way things go in my classroom.
The school culture is good, and even with a few different principals in that time period, I would agree that I've said this on podcasts before. I say this to anybody when this comes up. I could have a shorter drive. I spend a lot of time in my car. I don't know that for the time that I'm stuck in my car, I don't know that I'd be saving myself a lot of time or at least energy and satisfaction by working somewhere else. Not to say that the other schools are bad. I'm in a place where I have the ability to make a decision and not immediately be second-guessed or not be constantly justifying. That being said, if it's not going well, I think people would notice. And I'd like to think, but
I would agree.
Like you said, we talk about like differentiating to students and doing the rest, and you have to think of teachers as a craftsman of sorts. And say the sculptor, you're working with a block of marble. Like not all marble is the same,
it's not.
So you have to address it differently. That being said, we do professional development and staff meetings and the rest as though every teacher gets the same instruction, which is safe. I don't know if it's our best use of time.
Not necessarily. But I would argue that's at a county level. And I have worked in places where the systems are smaller, so the county is not trying to make decisions for 15 high schools, right? Or for, all of the high schools plus all their feeder schools, middle and elementary. So I think that's just one of the realities of an institution the size of Loudoun County. They're going to have to invest their money in some of those projects.
Broadways, right? And it's because
it's just inevitable.
Yeah, it's almost like the political system would do it, because you taught in New York, right?
With a very small,
But does New York do districts?
Yes, and so there was a high school and middle school combined, an elementary school, and they had their own school board. So the people were making decisions just for that little community.
Where I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I think it's statewide, that's how Pennsylvania does it. You have the district. So you have one superintendent who works with, in most cases, one high school. In some places, they split into two. I don't know how that plays out in cities. So maybe, like in Philadelphia, they might have a city school system. I don't know that for sure. But you have small school board, one superintendent, one high school, one middle school, 5 elementary school, something like that. And someone who I talked to previously, Ian Sirotkin, who's now on or about to be on the school board, he's from New York, and he pointed out that systems like that, he used the word, I think, nimble or agile, that you can pivot quickly. You can make the change because in a larger system, everything should probably move slower because you have so many more moving parts. And something that I don't like, and this is not a criticism of our principal or any others, but as the system gets bigger like that, a principal in certain ways is relegated to middle management. And so it's very difficult to be a good principal and for them to be a good employee. It's like sometimes for me to do what I think makes me a good teacher doesn't always make me a good employee, and I have to be careful of that balance. And I think the bigger the system gets, the harder it is to be the principal.
Absolutely.
And if it's hard to be the principal, you better believe it's going to be hard to be the teacher unless you have a very good principal that balances that well. Do you, given experience in other places, do you feel like teachers have more free, like, do you think it trickles down, basically? Do you think in the places you've worked in Maryland and New York, do you feel like individual classroom teachers had more freedom or independence, or it's about the same with just a different structure?
So in San Diego, where I taught, very free. and I really shouldn't even have been teaching high school because I had never done it. I was making it up as I went along, but like no one really gave me any direction. I just figured that out for 3 years.
I didn't know you worked there. Okay.
I did, yeah, in a private school. So then I came home and I got certified to teach in New York State. And then I taught in a very small school, basically graduated about 40 kids in a year. And it was a K-12 building. I was the 8th grade teacher for everyone and the 11th grade teacher. So I had the 2 testing years in New York. I had a lot of freedom to do. Nobody really questioned anything that I did as long as my Regents scores and my 8th grade testing scores were reasonable. And I spent 5 years there and, the superintendent came to me once and said, I have this extra money. Do you need it for one of your projects? And I told him I needed, feathers and these things because of this Native American thing that we were doing. And he was like, I got to go to the school board and ask for money for feathers. And I'm like, well, here's the project. They're doing this nature thing and we're going on a field trip, whatever. He goes, all right. And so he never,
I'm just imagining the principal being like, you know what, I'd rather not present it. And he's just handing you $40 out of his own wallet.
So it was just kind of, I never felt as if they questioned that. And I ended up involved in a lot of grants and a lot of programs. And I was trying to bring a learner-centered classroom. That was a couple of places where I ended up on these documentaries about how to do that. Maryland was my first experience with a big school where, they graduate 400 to 500 kids. And it was a terrible school because the principal was horrible and they had this canned curriculum. Everyone is supposed to be on page 15 of night. And I went into it not even realizing that could possibly be a thing. So I was 4 months into teaching and they had given me these like packets and then they told me sort of, these are the books we generally do, that we do in 9th grade. And I took that to be like, well, we generally do that. And somebody came to me and they're like, why are you teaching? Like, you're not supposed to be on, the carousel at this point. And I'm like, the carousel? What are you talking about? And you were literally supposed to go page by page, which I did not do. And then at the end of the year, my 9th grade test scores were completely different from everybody else's 9th grade test scores, even the honors kids. And I was teaching the academic kids. And they're like, this is and so the principal ended up sticking me in a room and saying, do your thing.
Different, better, different, worse, different,
much,
a little
much
better.
Much better. So, I mean, they blew the honors kids away.
Well, and that's where I would say, like, you can't argue with results. The trick is
they left me alone.
Getting the opportunity to get your results. And in some places, it's
so
hard
they
to
were
get
just
there.
like, okay, forget it. We're gonna leave you alone. And then I only stayed there 2 years because I just thought this is too, and there was a lot of animosity. I didn't realize that several of the people in my department had been the people to make this curriculum that I was so negative about.
You've alienated some coworkers.
Everybody, yes. And it wasn't even so much, I didn't want to be told what to do every day. That's my thing. Like, I do this job so that I can go in and figure out what I want to do with this. I want to teach night the way that I want to teach night. I want to have the opportunity to think of things. I don't want that all done for me. I'm sure there are teachers who would love to have that already laid out and done for them. And that's fine. But to me, that shouldn't be a requirement. I shouldn't have to be on page 26.2 because you say that.
I don't want someone else to do my planning. I want someone else to do my grading.
Sure. I mean,
that's the worst part of my job. Is somebody else grade the essays, I'll plan
every
everybody's
English teacher
classes.
has, I mean, but as my mom says, there's a reason they call it work. And if that's the worst thing that ever happens is that I get annoyed by my paper load, whatever. I want to plan. I want to see my kids. I want to think about what I'm doing. I want to be able to go in and, like you say, I can pivot in my classroom anytime I need to. 9/11 happened while I was teaching at that school, and I was the only English teacher who addressed it. Because we had to keep going in the packet. We had to keep filling out the graphic organizers. Here I got them doing a,
do you think, and I don't know, maybe it's not fair to guess, but do you think that people made that decision because they were, beholden to a packet, or they didn't know what to do or what to say, and so rather than address a hard topic poorly or on the fly, they just stuck with a plan?
I think
the safe thing is just keep doing what you're doing.
I'm sure it's a little bit of both, but I think nobody had empowered them to think about their lessons. And I stand at that school at Broad Run, and I hear him say, I want you to try things. I hear Dave say, I want you to try. So if there are people who aren't, it's because they can't think of it on their own,
right.
or I suppose they're lazy, right? I mean, those, they choose not to, but there shouldn't be anybody complaining over there that they don't feel autonomy within their classroom to try the things that they want to try.
Or you at least started with it. I mean, I can't think.
You may have given it away.
I can't name anyone that's given, but I'm saying, like, everybody gets that message. So you said something before earlier, and it just sort of came back, though. The idea that teachers should be empowered to make the decisions. They should be treated as the professional and the rest. And I've said this a few different times and probably a few different ways, but if it's not authentic to the teacher, it's not authentic to the student. If the teacher can't feel some sort of energy, or, and some of this is acting, I get excited about commas and semicolons, and, I mean, in real life, how often? Once in a while, I'm into that. But
I don't know. You sent me some messages about
the Oxford comma, right? But like, how often does anyone really care about? But I sure make it look like I care because I want them to do it. But if you're given these things that someone else made, that someone else has dictated, it's sometimes hard to feel that excitement.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, you say, well, I'm going to make it all myself, or I want the independence and the freedom to do my thing. That is great because it lets great teachers be great. The scary part for the administrator, the school board, or the parents is that it lets the bad teacher be the bad teacher.
I know.
And, and you said at one point, what you said earlier, something, smart people or capable people or something like that. Do you think, without naming name, do you think, and being honest, do you think the average teacher is smart?
Oh, that's such a loaded question.
I will clarify for those listening that we're both thoroughly above average teachers, right? So,
sure, of course.
But
we are smart.
Right, but...
I think, so the big political issue is you aren't going to attract, and everyone says this, it's kind of a cliche, you aren't going to attract large numbers of the best and brightest of America's people if you pay teachers what society basically pays teachers.
Right.
So you're always going to be working a little bit from the premise that you have to, that you're not getting the best of the best. And I don't know that that's legitimately going to change, especially in the next 20 years as IT and all of those things take off.
Right.
And, people find that those things there. On the other hand, I would argue that I personally know a large number of teachers who wouldn't want to be doing anything else and do live with that kind of passion. Does that make it the average? I'm not sure.
Right.
But I also think we have the opportunity to have the best of both worlds in that you can have things in place for the people who struggle.
Who need it. Yeah.
It's not that hard to do, but you can also allow people to opt out of it. And I think that really is kind of what Broad Run has done. Through CLTs and through curriculum and through some common planning stuff, we have found ways to maybe give help to people. And I know in some subjects like math teachers tend to like pacing guides. They help them be the best teachers they can be.
Well, it's very sequential.
Math is not going to change very much from year to year. So for many teachers, maybe some of those ideas actually made math teaching better, right? And helped the top keep doing what they were doing and helped the bottom. And as long as we don't get too assessment obsessed and kids are just always taking and retaking assessments, I think some of that pacing stuff might be very useful. I worry a little bit in the social sciences because I feel like they have so much content and I wish that they would let some of the content go. I feel like sometimes inevitably social science teachers are forced to choose coverage over depth, and I don't like that.
You and I have had this talk before about in English, especially in AP Lang, and I'm better or different. I don't know. It's still a thing I work on is doing more by doing less. Like we could actually cover fewer topics or literally read fewer items and get more done in the learning.
Right.
But it's a hard balance because I get real eager and I want to like fire through stuff.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I'm always like dragging students along. And to a certain extent, that's okay. It keeps things moving. But there's a balance. In history, like, the only thing, we actually do something about like bias in writing in class, and we use Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. We use the first chapter where he talks about how biased all of your history books are and how it's not a necessity. You know, how when a map maker makes a map, it has to be distorted. 3-dimensional object going to, you have to. History doesn't have to be. The only limitation to history is either what you have access to, and a good historian has access to a lot, and then how many pages you want to write. So if you don't mind spending more time, there's literally no reason you can't cover all of the perspectives or all the different people affected.
All the different people that are,
Well, and so, you know, you think about how a lot of history classes go, and they know there's a test at the end, they've got a standardized test, they've got this thing, and so you fire through as many things as you can, but you lose this depth. Like, one of my favorite classes in high school, I took an elective history class called The History of the Vietnam War. And by just luck, right place, right time, right teacher, we had a guy, Mr. Robinson, and I'm blanking on his first name right now. The guy was fantastic. He was a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army who had done, I think, 3 or 4 tours in Vietnam. And he would literally answer anything right up to the point where you hit a point and you go, I can't tell you that. I can't tell. And if you asked him what he did, he would always tell you his job was to sit in the helicopter and airlift and drop ice cream to the troops, which is clearly, you know.
Not
but it was fantastic because for an entire semester, all you did was this one thing. And it was amazing, right? And so I think about how we don't necessarily offer a ton of electives, and you have a lot of classes with a test at the end. I think there may be a lot of good teachers who don't always, or, you know, people who could be great teachers who aren't or aren't yet.
Don't feel that
because
freedom yet.
you have this whole timeline. I mean, in English, it's skills-based. So I can spend as much or as little time as I think I need to, as long as we cover all or most all of those things. How do you distinguish?
Well, I also think we're still somewhat attached, just for whatever reason, to this notion of after the kids have worked on something for a while, I have to put a piece of paper down in front of them, or I have to put something in the computer that they work on independently and answer in the form of questions to make sure that they understand that. And I really, really don't think that is necessary. I don't, you know, and Dave said it a couple of years ago. I remember him standing at a faculty meeting and he said, you know, just about every piece of information you are going to ask kids to memorize this year, they can tap into their phones. Yeah. And they can find that answer out in 3 seconds. Right. And it doesn't invalidate that. I'm not saying we shouldn't be working with those ideas, but we really, if we're honest, as an institution, we haven't embraced the knowledge that, or the awareness that these students really don't have to memorize all the stuff we've been making them memorize for the last 150 years. It's just not necessary.
We don't need the class time to do that.
We just don't. I mean, they don't.
In your upper level classes, you could literally, here's the list of names, dates, places.
Figure it out.
Go look it up, figure it out, and come in and take the test.
And come in or have a conversation about it, or whatever it is we're going to do to show that you know it.
One of my best English classes in college was, I think it was I want to say it was the Modern American Novel, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what it's called, but it picks up in 1900. And the first book we read was actually nonfiction, and it was The Education of Henry Adams, which was cool. It was cool. But as we're reading it, and he's doing all this sort of lectures about time period and the changing into a modern world, we got this like 6-7 page like timeline basically, just lists of dates. Or names or like technological advances. And it was, your job was to go research, figure it out, know all of it. And you were going to get a test at the end. And I mean, there were like, I don't know, 200 things on this list. In the end, you got a test on like 50 of them. One of them, I will never forget, was the pneumatic tire. And I'm like, who gives a crap? I'm like, whatever. And then I'm looking at why. I'm like, okay, well, you got bumpy roads, and then roads get better, and you can travel faster.
But it gives you a vision, right, of what the world was like.
By the time we're done, though, I realized that we don't get Jack Kerouac's on the road if you don't have a good tire to drive across the country on the road with it. I'm like, oh, holy crap.
It's all connected,
Which is where I'm like, I would never say you shouldn't know stuff, but we don't necessarily need to tell you all the stuff you need to know.
Right.
If you can look it up in 3 seconds, you go look that up in 3 seconds.
Right.
Here we can have a conversation that you can't have on your own.
So yeah, like let me give you the list of the 50 people you need to know, the 50 events that you need to know, and you come in with whatever you need to be able to address those things, and we're gonna we're gonna do research, we're gonna be in groups, we're gonna present whatever it is. I think there are opportunities that as an institution we're not taking advantage of yet. I don't think that means school doesn't work. I just think it means that kids more and more feel a little bit like, why do I need to do this? Although, when I was in high school, did I really think I needed to take Mrs. Grace's government quizzes? Not particularly. Do you know what I'm saying? So maybe, sometimes when we think about what that's like, that's really just teenagers being teenagers. Like, they're supposed to kind of outgrow what we're selling them by the time they get to be seniors, or they're not ready to move to the next stuff. So there's that truth, too. I think in certain ways,
as much as we want to badmouth kids and everyone, I don't, but I mean, people, broadly, maybe that's not new. Like, we always do that.
Exactly.
But maybe in a way we are making progress because I think we listen more to what kids say, which is maybe why we have some of those hesitations. Yeah. All right. So what kind of high school student were you?
Oh gosh, I was such an earnest one. What was I? I played 4 sports in high school. And I was president of, practically everything that you could be president of. And so I was very, very busy. I was, Key Club president and student council president, and I was the yearbook editor. And so I did all of that stuff, and I played 4 sports, and I was 3rd in my class.
4? So what was the
I played
season,
soccer in the fall, because it was a fall sport there. Volleyball was this little tiny season squished in between soccer and basketball.
Okay.
And then I played basketball. And so I was always, and we had a great soccer team, so I was always going to states and then playing volleyball, so running those 2 seasons. And then volleyball was over and basketball had already started, so I was in those 2 seasons. And then I ran track in the spring. So I played a lot of sports. And so I was 3rd in my class, and my teachers used to say to me, if you worked a little harder, you could beat this girl who was 1st in our class. And I said, yeah, but then I couldn't do all this other stuff. Yeah. And so, I mean, I genuinely have always loved school. Like, from the time I was a little kid, I have loved school. And, like, just like, get excited about, looking at, I get to take this year, and I'm just like I just have always really liked that stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't think that a lot of high school was sort of ridiculous. Like, I thought, okay, you got to play the game, you got to figure this out.
Thinking about your experience, multiple sports, multiple clubs, obviously competitive, right? But maybe not competitive to I have to be number 1 in the class, but I need to be close, right? Yeah. And so, when you're now as a teacher and you're talking to students who are in similar situations, do you advise that this is good, healthy behavior?
No,
or are you
actually,
do you tell them to do less, do more?
Well, here's the thing. I think the one thing that I've discerned that seems to have changed since I was in high school till now is that this perception that there are certain schools one must go to, and that one is a failure if one doesn't do that. And that sort of high pressure, I'm sure exists in a lot of places, but in Virginia, I'm sure it's also because we have such good state schools, and there's so many more students. I mean, I did not grow up someplace where 90% of the students were going away to college. So it was a much different. Exactly. It was a much different. So when I watch them, I just think there's this kind of artificial intensity that unfortunately means they're not as checked into the process of what they might actually learn. That it's so grade obsessed that they're not. So my advice is always actually try to find some things that you care about. Instead of, I was never in high school with this notion that I was going to create a resume. I wasn't thinking, I'm going to go do Key Club and go do this so that I can, create a resume. I was thinking, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in that. I'm going to go do those things. So I'm just going to do those things. And more I think there's this kind of angling to create your persona of who you want to be. You're building a resume. You're looking, and that to me is very artificial. And I think a lot of it is about the fact that we rate school, like all that stuff, like what's the top school, what's the, there's just this whole thing. And I've even said before, I kind of blame parents, like my generation, because I feel like we've taken this thing, parenting, that should be kind of very, you're doing it for others, and it should be, and we've turned it into sort of this reflection of us, so that we have to be proud of what our parents, or of what our students are doing, our kids are doing, and we have to be happy with the college they're going to, so we can talk about it at a cocktail party or whatever that is. And I really dislike that notion. I mean, it's supposed to be about them.
It's like a big change.
And it really isn't about them. My parents didn't care about that, so they didn't know anything about that stuff.
I bet like on a long enough timeline, I bet it's not actually new. Because you got to think there are times, there are cultures like, what is it?
I think the pressure, I do think the pressure, because of it's a numbers game, and I think the funnel of how many kids from this area can go to UVA is new. That was not the case 30 years ago. That did not matter.
Well, and it's almost like it's like two things. I mean, in a way, at some point it wasn't new, but you didn't worry about like numbers or grades. But like the what was it? It's Confucius, like filial piety. Like everything's about like your dedication to family and representing the family and carrying the family name. And then ideally it goes well because you're going to be the one that takes care of your parents. So there's probably a little bit of that built into it. But the way you just kept saying numbers, like if you think about, I don't know, do you know like fantasy sports? Like, people playing fantasy football. Yeah. Like there are guys who are like great fantasy football players. Yeah. Because they put up great stats, but who in real life you wouldn't necessarily want on your team because they actually screw up a lot of other stuff.
There you go.
So on paper,
they look great.
I want that guy on my team for fantasy football. But if it's real football, I don't want that guy.
Right.
And all of a sudden, we're creating students that are turning themselves into great like fantasy students in a way. Or like, I'm creating this resume, I'm signaling in a certain way, which is probably what a lot of colleges. You think most people don't have a job that relates to their degree.
Sure.
A lot of colleges just indicating the kind of person I am, and I'm persistent, I know how to follow rules, whatever.
Yeah.
But we're creating that younger and younger to just signal all of the rest of this stuff, and you're maybe not learning. Right. Or at least not learning as much as you could.
I mean, I think our students are learning. When I look at them and I watch them react to certain, essays in class or books, or we have certain conversations, I think we are. I just think somehow or other, I think we should be asking ourselves, how can they do it without feeling so much pressure that it's going to go down a single path, that there's only a single, because I do not remember feeling the kind of stress about every move I made in high school. And I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty reflective about that. I was not stressed about that 24/7. And we have an awful lot of kids living with this constant fear of every quiz I take, every moment, everything I do somehow is this, and maybe that's the world we live in because it feels like every move we make is somehow recorded and posted and everyone knows it. That social media kind of thing. Or the pressure, that their lives are being lived in such a way that everything they think about is only what it's going to become down the road instead of what do I want to be doing now as a kid? Yeah. I want to go to a football game. I remember telling kids this fall, I was like, it was a long weekend, hey, just having a casual conversation. Kids leaving my AP class. What are you going to do? Oh, I got to study all weekend for the SATs. And I'm like, dude, it's a 3-day weekend. It's the fall of your junior year. Do something fun.
Go do something fun.
Go to a movie. I don't have time for a movie. Go have dinner with your friends. Do something that releases that pressure a little bit.
I tell people, and this started as a separate conversation about, how you should or shouldn't be handling going to a party, or if your friend offers you a beer and you're 17, and the correct answer is no, right? But but the thing is, are
you going to get caught? I don't know. But the correct answer is, what's the risk?
But that's sort of it. And so what I always tell them is, you shouldn't be judging everything based on either exactly what that act is, you think about what do I risk versus what do I get a little bit, or you make the decision based on sort of how it's like. I feel like kids are hyper aware of like the butterfly effect, that if this quiz does this does this to the grade, which does this to the thing.
This and then I don't get a UVA.
And I tell them like behaviorally though, I say like the most important thing that most people are doing between 16 and 20, 16 and 22, something like that, is that you're doing things that are creating options and creating habits. If you've never done something, like if you've never had a beer, the best thing is to just say no for as long as you can, because as long as you keep saying no, you don't really know what you're missing. You just say no. Once you've said yes once, it's now an option.
Yeah, there you go.
And
I can do this again.
The taboo disappears.
Yeah.
So once you've done something once, like skydiving, jump out of a plane, horrifying, right?
Yeah.
But once you've done it once, you're a little scared the next time. But yeah, all right, I know what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
And so once you've done a thing, it becomes an option.
Right.
And once a thing's an option, you might do it more, which turns things easily, like what becomes normal to you between 15 and 22, 23, you're setting up for that's normal for the rest of your life. And so I was telling them, I'm not telling you to do or not do anything. I'm telling you that if you're thinking about doing something now that you don't think you want to be doing when you're 30 or 35 or 40 or whatever, then don't do it now, or hold off as long as you can, because it decreases the chance of the habit. This was a conversation that very much started during like a study hall when a kid who had gotten comfortable enough is trying to ask general questions about like, what do I do at this party this weekend kind of thing, without incriminating themselves. And so I'm trying to give what I think is good advice, but do what you think is right. Don't get in trouble. Do what your parents tell you. You know, whatever. That's up to you. And I now find myself giving the same talk, which was basically be mindful of your decisions when you're in a social setting. And I'm now doing it about studying. I literally just had this conversation with a kid last week who was worried about the SATs this past weekend. And I said, I just want you to think like you're putting a lot of pressure. You've already taken the test a couple of times. And I understand it's important to you. I said, but think about the anxiety and the stress. Like think of how you feel right now. And then answer one question. Do you want to feel like this for the rest of your life?
Right.
And he looked like, eyes got really wide. He goes, no. And I said,
right.
Then don't allow it to happen so often now. I'm not saying you're never going to be stressed.
Right.
But when you accept stress as just a thing that you're constantly dealing with,
and
just
they
go ahead
do.
and expect that's just going to be forever.
That's the thing. They do. I don't sleep. I mean, I hear them say it all the time. I don't have any time to sleep. I mean, then your schedule doesn't make any sense. Why are you taking 6 AP classes? That is my biggest, if I could change, I know you said we were going to get to what's the one thing you do. I would find a way to somehow curb the number of kids taking vast amounts of AP classes. I just don't think it's healthy for probably 90% of students to be taking the number of AP classes that they are. I know there's a very, very small percentage of kids who really, really can handle that intellectually and are ready for that. But it's only about 5% of the kids who are giving themselves that schedule.
Right.
And for the rest of them, it is sheer hold on by your fingertips. And it is so horrible
because
to
if
watch
I have
that.
one less AP than this other guy, he gets
exactly,
into this school
and that's the thing, and that's the mentality. It's like now that, and so I blame, if I have to blame anything, I blame us giving the bumps for AP classes. You didn't have that beforehand. The GPA bump has destroyed the lives of intelligent but not like super genius kids who before might have gone, oh, I like history. Gonna go take a couple of those. I'll take a dual enrollment and I'll take a history. Now I'm gonna take it in every single class because I can't opt out once I've opted in, or I hurt my GPA and I make my schedule look weak. And that is the mentality. It is like a plan for war. That these kids are constructing, and they're encouraged to construct it in about 6th grade when they start taking whatever the crazy math is that they can take as a 6th grader in order to math out by the time they're sophomores. I mean, we have kids taking AB calculus. Now, again,
we have kids,
if a kid is that math kid, great. But the truth is, somehow or other, a high percentage of our students are being made to feel like they have to be those kids in every subject across the board or they're losing. And that's not reasonable.
Well, and it doesn't.
Don't do that to your kids, because I didn't do it to mine.
I could care less. My kids are going to be chair makers.
I mean,
you ever buy a nice wooden
whatever.
dining room chair?
I
could buy an entire wood shop for the same price of 1 year of college. You're set for the rest of your life. Like I can't. No, but but if you think about it, like it doesn't serve anyone because it's not serving the students' goals in most cases. It's the kids are unhappy and they're stressed. The parents maybe feel good that their kid's doing this advanced thing, but
whatever.
Well, but
to what end?
You don't get to sit down and have dinner. You don't have there's all these things going on. And then if you look at it, like none of the places where we assess students in ways where we compare schools county to county, state to state, or in the international stuff, or everyone freaks out we're falling behind. It's and maybe a little, but never in the ways that people write about in the newspaper. Right. They don't test calculus. They don't we push kids through to get them as far into math as they can, but not as good at math. Most people,
and then they can't do percentages.
That's what
they don't understand basic math.
I go into an AP class with kids who at least half the kids in the room are way better at math than I am now, and way better than I ever was or will be. But we do, it's out of it's out of 20. And you have kids who are in multivariable calculus.
Out of 20? Yeah.
These kids can, oh my gosh, I can't even begin to describe the kind of math they try to explain to me, and I just laugh at them.
Right.
And they pull the calculator. Now, if you do it just out of reflex, okay, that's fine. But if you can't easily and quickly think through a basic, percentage,
right?
But some of these kids can,
So I was trying to buy
count up a scorecard.
I was trying to buy T-shirts once with cash at at Broad Run, and this was years ago. I think they were I'm pretty sure that for whatever reason they were $12 a piece. So it was an uneven number, and I was buying 2 of them. So it was $24, and I handed the girl $40, and she just stared at me. And I go, and she was a senior, and I said, I'll bet you're in AB Calculus, right? She goes, no, actually BC. I was like, and you're struggling to figure out. I go, it would be 16, you need to give me back, and I tell her the change, whatever it was. It was it's $24, so you need to give me $16 back. And she went, oh, okay. Yeah. And so she goes in there, but they can't. And I can remember when I was a manager at Express years and years ago, in between my teaching gigs, and I had women running these, stores much larger than ours, and we had to do these numbers that you figured out on a calculator, and they would call on the phone, and we'd all be on a conference call, and they'd be like, I don't know how to do such and such, and it was somebody was 115% to their plan. Right. And they understood percentages when they were less, but they didn't understand once they got to 100 that it was then 115%, right. And they couldn't do the math.
Right.
And I was like, are you kidding me? You guys are running these businesses, and they were all, I was probably 30 when I was doing that, and many of them were, maybe 4 or 5 years younger than me, running these stores, and it was you don't, and they all had college educations. You don't know this basic, how to think through those things. We're losing that stuff.
Reading, writing, arithmetic.
I know, really.
Literacy and numeracy is really, and that's where, you say the kids taking the 6 APs, and we're about to have the conversations about scheduling.
What are you doing for next year? I know, why are you doing this? I tell them all the time, I'm look, if any of you are going to sign up for 5 or 6 AP classes, and really probably 4 goes into this too, but for those of you taking 5 and 6 AP classes, understand that is never what the College Board intended when they originally created this program. Except that now they make money from it. Now they're okay with it.
I'm not saying that they're not okay with it. I'm just saying that none of this was the original intention. This was kids who are good in certain areas to give you access to closer to a college level class or curriculum. And so I tell them, if you are capable of taking 5 or 6 APs and doing well in them all and still having some semblance of a social life, you should not be here. You should go to college. And you will find that not only will you learn more in those same classes, you will actually have more free time in which to do the work and the rest. They get loaded up, and so maybe thinking about learning what they need to learn, or giving them a little more flexibility. Do you think we could just graduate more kids early?
Maybe. But see, I guess my worry about that is that the reason these kids are where they are is because their middle school years have been turned into high school years.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that's a benefit. I don't know that emotionally and socially, when you look at the suicide rates in our country and for teenagers, and you look at the rates of depression and anxiety, I don't know that making them high school students in middle school is actually serving them. I would much prefer we go back to an older system where there isn't this rush to get places. Maybe we create, like you were suggesting, that we have some more electives. Like maybe we create some things that are, engaging for them. And are there a few kids ready to go to
class that's all science books?
Sure.
Like think about it. Like if you're a science kid, we can do reading and writing with science or history. Like we could do any.
We could do it with any of those things. I mean, I do think choices. Right, and I think there are ways that we could make the time more meaningful. Are there kids maybe who at 17 are ready to, like, I don't know. Like I look at the numbers of kids who don't stay in school once they get there. Right. I look at the number of kids that we send to four-year universities in the first place with great pride, and I'm not really sure we should be taking a lot of pride in that, because I don't know if they're really not equipped to handle it, and they don't have the skills to stay there or the emotional stability to stay there. That tells me there's something that's not happening in those middle and high school years that should be. They probably ought to be like failing a little bit more than they are at certain things. They ought to be experiencing some stuff that toughens them up a little bit. I mean, I was not, you asked what kind of high school student I was, very successful, went away to college assuming I knew exactly what to do, and fell on my face for the first semester because I assumed I was going to be a doctor. Like, that was what you did. You were a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer. My dad hates lawyers. It probably would have been a good one, but I knew that was not an option. Engineer seemed boring to me, so like everything was like, oh, I'm just going to be a doctor. I think I had no idea what I was going to do, but I loaded my schedule with biology, physics, calculus, which my school told me I had taken pre-calculus, which was a lie. I had taken college algebra. So here I go in a real calculus class, and I had no, you want to talk about flounder. I was a disaster my freshman year. My mom said, make sure you take an English class. That was the only class I did really well in. Everything else, I barely skated. Like, I was struggling the entire time. But it didn't occur to me that I wouldn't continue. It was like, well, I had crappy grades, but I'm gonna figure it out. It's gonna work out over time, and it did. But a lot of kids feel like they go to college, the first sign of distress or it's not working, and they start dropping class. Oh, I can't take this class because my GPA. It's that same game. Yeah. Oh, I can't take this class because it's going to hurt my GPA, and then it becomes I got to get into graduate school, and and like you said, no tech for you, right? I'm not posting things like not
no tech, but I don't post anything.
Not posting stuff, but like I tried to make really conscious decisions about how much time kids spend staring at screens. Why are we not thinking about that? Like, what is a good amount? Sure, we gave them this tool, but what is to say that they should be using that tool 7.5 hours a day? I hope for the sake of their eyes that they're not, for the sake of their ability to engage with other human beings that they're not. So I just think, institutionally, and maybe it really just comes down to individual you just have to make decisions that help kids feel, like it's okay to do what, what's there. And that's, we aren't the only voice in their heads, right? So that's a collective conversation about parents. I wish that Road to Nowhere, Race to Nowhere, that documentary that came out a few years ago that was all about, why are high school kids doing this? And it was all, so like, where did that sort of go as a movement? I want people making better decisions about what they're doing so their lives are not so crazy.
Yeah, I thought of this, and actually this is funny because I don't remember if we'd started recording or not, but you referenced, and I'm going to slaughter the name as well, Noah Yuval Harari.
Yeah.
So I think it's in Sapiens, or in Homo Deus, which is the next. It's one of the two. I read them both. he talks about how like school has changed and how that changes the way we like learn and the way we think about school, which is important because we put a lot of both time and money and all this stuff into it. And he pointed out how like GPAs and letter grades are like a relatively recent invention, that like it wasn't in common usage until you get into somewhere in the early to mid 1900s. And so, he pointed, I think his example was maybe like Isaac Newton or something like this, and said, Newton's, he's brilliant, he's weird, and he's probably autistic, but, he's a brilliant guy and very socially awkward, but he's the top student in all of his math and science classes. And that didn't actually mean anything, because being the top student just meant that the professor thought you were the top student. Because the valedictorian was the person who the faculty together said, that's our best student. That person gives the speech, because there was no GPA.
Right.
Every class. And this is where I think this would be the easiest thing. Like, it's a big institution and it's hard to change. There's probably a lot we can or should change. The easiest thing in my mind that you could do to change the way students address the different classes and the pressure, all pass-fail grading. Make it bump failing up to 70 or 75% if you want.
Yeah.
Pass-fail.
I'd be okay with that.
So now the kid takes the class because they're into it or because they feel competitively I need to be. But if this isn't a class I really care about, I just need to learn the stuff and do well enough. I don't grub for every individual point. I don't challenge.
And obsess about that.
I got a 33 out of 40 on this, but I think it should have been the 34.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, it doesn't actually matter.
Right.
But they're in a system where it looks like it matters, and if they do enough math and butterfly effect it out, it might matter. Pass fail everything. And that way, the class you're really into, spend more time there.
Right.
Like if the kid didn't think there was a difference. I still have a kid this year, or I taught last year, who's a senior this year. Brilliant guy, going to be very successful. Did great on the AP exam, and finished with a B+. 89, and he always says it was an 89.3, right? He did the math. He did the hand math.
He probably did.
And he comes in, and it was this percentage. And I said, trust me, like at the end of each quarter, like if I can bump your grade by 3 points, I do it, because it's English, it's subjective. I could have been tired when I graded your essay. If you're within what I believe is a reasonable range of error, I'm happy to help you. And to this day, I wrote his letters of recommendation. Like he comes around, so it's not like he's mad at me too much.
But he thinks it's funny.
But at least once a week, he'll drop by and make some mention of 89.3 or 89.4, whatever it is, and I'm like, And in the end, like, I feel a little bad. I don't feel bad enough to do anything differently. Fine. Right, exactly. He'll be fine. But I understand his concern. Yeah. Right. And I also think that not for him. For him, it's a valid concern. I get it, that the change of 2 decimals or whatever it is would change your grade, which would look different or affect you. I get it, but it's a stupid concern in general. The fact that we've created the opportunity for a 17-year-old kid to worry about that.
Right. It's ridiculous.
The fact that fraction of a point, he spent more time thinking about that than the cute girl sitting next to him in class. Like, we are not serving...
Or the actual essay that you were asking him to think about and write.
We are not serving the long-term goals of our species when the kid thinks more about point 2 than about procreation.
Right.
That is not a healthy place for a 17-year-old to be.
Yeah.
No. I don't know.
I would love pass-fail. I think
pass-fail all across the board.
The reality is, of course, that you'll never see it unless a lot of systems decide to fall that way, right? Because that would ultimately put every kid in Loudoun County at a disadvantage compared to all the kids in Fairfax and all the kids in here and all the kids. I mean, you'd have to agree. I mean, I think some things are slowly toppling. The fact that Ivies are no longer taking APs as credit, I think is going to...
are doing tests optional.
Yep. And so I think we're slowly maybe starting to topple some of that stuff. And it's such a weird thing, because I'm pretty sure I didn't have any teachers in high school, nor really my parents, who spent a whole lot of time thinking about whether I was like too stressed or could survive, or whether I was feeling okay about everything. No one thought about that stuff, right? And so they didn't think about it, and it wasn't an issue. Now we think about it all the time, and it's a bigger issue. So I don't really know if that's because
putting the worries into
exactly
you,
like are we thinking about it too much? But I also think that the genuine level of pressure to be successful, what we
Right.
consider successful, has just increased astronomically in the last 30 years. I really do believe that. And I think that's partly because we have so many more people trying to go to colleges, and we don't really have that many more colleges than we had
Right.
30 years ago. So, that's kind of a numbers game. And it's just this expectation now that everyone is going to go to schools, and once we started ranking them, that, I don't know, it's just this bizarre numbers game,
And,
I think, is what the pressure is.
Yeah.
So any little thing you can do to try to distinguish yourself, and actually what I tell the kids all the time, I'm like, every time you make one of those moves, you actually make yourself look more like all the other kids who are also making those moves. So that, you go out and join this club and volunteer here and go on this and do that. And all you really do is make yourself a part of the wallpaper, because everybody's doing all those things. So how do you, but then it's like you're still gaming the system. I don't know. It's just bizarre.
We had a kid a few years ago. I taught her junior year in AP, and then senior year she was in my study hall.
Mm-hmm.
And brilliant, like very good student. She was going to be fine doing whatever. And the thing, probably the thing that first tipped me off that she's either a good student or at least good at gaming school is that she sits with very good posture, and she's the kid who nods with the teacher.
Yeah,
she gestures back.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of the year, it's just for everything. And by midway through the year, she gets comfortable. So I know that something isn't going as well when she starts to tilt the head and do this stuff, because I'm like, this is a kid who's actually giving me feedback as we're going. Yeah. But fantastic, 5 on the AP exam, top grades, all this stuff. And I remember talking to her somewhere middle of junior year, and she was talking about joining NHS and doing this club and doing all this stuff. And I was like, look, I'm going to be honest, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's just, what do you mean? I'm like, everyone does that stuff. It doesn't matter.
Right.
I'm not, if you're into it, if you have fun with it, do it.
Yeah.
But if it's a pain to you, if you're like, God, now I have to do this, don't do it.
Yeah.
You're putting all this time into things that don't matter.
Right.
Her senior year, her goal was to apply to every Ivy League school. Oh my God. Simply, her family could afford it. The family's got some money, and she just wanted to see if she could get into them all. Because once in a while, you have that kid, and they make the national news and whatever.
Yeah.
And I said, but here's the thing.
How much time is that?
I said, look at how much time
exhausting.
to write all these supplemental essays and to do all this stuff.
Is that fun for you? Is that like a hobby?
Yeah. And she's like, well, yeah, I mean, I can do it. And I said, it's not that you can't or can do it. It's not, we shouldn't do things just because we can. You got to have some purpose. And I said, and also think that you're spending money on applications to schools,
right?
That some of which you would never go to. I know they're all Ivy League schools, but there's a few of them that they're not as good at what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And so maybe you get in, that means that maybe another kid didn't get in. Mm-hmm. It also means that you just threw away $60, $80, $100
give that
money
you could
have
charity.
Exactly. I said, give it to charity. And so we have this whole talk, and she's like, well, I know whatever. And so she didn't apply to all of them. And eventually she got in. She goes to Johns Hopkins for biomedical engineering or something. And in an interview and then talking to people, she realized that all of this stuff that she was doing, all these clubs, didn't matter. And I was like, I told you so. And I say this real loud in study hall because I had a bunch of juniors who I had also in class that year. Yeah. And they're all leaning in to listen to what she's saying. And I said, so why did you get in? You have great grades. You did all the stuff. You got SATs. What was it, since you're now agreeing with me that it wasn't that you joined every honor society available? She goes, I mean, if I had really thought about it, I should have known this ahead of time. But I did this science camp a few years ago, and we did this independent thing, and I basically created a textile, a material that didn't exist before. Mm-hmm. She goes, it's this weird, spongy kind of thing. There's stuff like it, but nothing that's it. She goes, so I patented it. My dad helped me out. I have a patent. I'm a proven material scientist. I said, awesome. So and she goes, I got in because I'm already doing something that is bioengineering, biomedical engineering, whatever.
What I'm going to do.
She goes, so I have some grades and the rest, and then I have this. I have a patent. And I went, so she goes, so I'm going to Hopkins, which is the best or one of the best schools in the country for this. Yeah. And she goes, I really just needed to keep the grades up. I apparently had my qualification sophomore year when I invented this thing. Yeah. And so the other kids are like, so I have to patent something? I'm like, you're missing the point.
Not the point.
Not the point.
Exactly.
You have to just demonstrate that you're good at something and you're genuinely into it. And I'm not saying you can't be competitive, but you can't be competitive at everything.
Well, and that's the thing, is that not every kid is that kid. But not every kid is going to go to Hopkins. Right. So there's a place for all of our kids who just do high school reasonably well. It all kind of filters out anyway.
Yeah.
They don't all go to UVA.
Ringling Brothers runs a clown college for a reason. But really, though,
they go to Nova.
there are options.
They go, they go to, I don't even like this idea that there's like upper tier and lower tier schools.
Yeah.
They can all find a college at which professors work who have PhDs, and they can engage in things that will, I really don't believe one over another is going to make the difference in their life. I really don't believe that's true. I don't think where you go makes that big a difference, but we believe it does.
Well, and I mean, there's always been, as long as there have been universities, several hundred years, there have been better and worse.
Sure.
But there's almost never been a point at which you went to the lesser, we shouldn't even say worse, and you were somehow like discriminated against later on because so few people went. Any college was good, and even now, and this is so for James Madison, this is what I tell kids all the time. It's a good school. It's a better school now than when I went there. I don't know if I would get in again if I applied right now. But I said it's still the kind of school where you get out of it what you put into it.
Exactly.
Go to a school not for the name brand of the university, but for are they good in the program for the major you want, and then do you take classes with the best professors? If you I just pick my classes so that I get easier grades and I don't have to wake up early in the morning. No 8 a.m.s and easy. Right. You're gonna probably get a degree,
or pick what you're interested in too. Right. Like, what do you
take the
want
best professors,
to learn?
the best things available, and you'll be okay. It's in. Oh, it's a bad sign. I'm going to make a second Malcolm Gladwell reference. I don't feel good about it. But in David and Goliath, which is maybe his most questionable book, but there's a really good chapter in it. Have you read that one? Yeah. So there's a good chapter where he talks about like the big fish in the little pond.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that analogy.
It's
a great analogy.
Sometimes as we get later I've done it probably twice, but we have like enough time at some point in the spring. And the spring SAT, the March or May dates are coming up and kids are tense. And sometimes, I have I just print that one chapter and I'm like, just read that. Yeah. Like, what are we doing with it? Don't worry.
Just read it.
Do we need to annotate it? No, just read it. And then when they're done, they're like, is that true? And I go, I don't know. He's good at research, but you can make research look like anything. I'm just pointing out that some of you would have a better quality of life and maybe better opportunities if you were one of the strongest students at a less competitive school. When everybody wants to go to Harvard, somebody is the bottom of that class. Even the guy who graduates the bottom of his class in medical school gets to be a doctor. And so sometimes the diploma on the wall doesn't matter as much as the quality of getting there. John McCain is the best example. He was second from the bottom of his class at the Naval Academy.
He did fine.
He did fine, right? Yeah. He probably could have gone somewhere else, and if his goal was academic, grades, he probably could have gone somewhere else and been at or near the top of his class. Yeah. He did the thing he was into, and it was tough. Right. Make the decisions for yourself. We don't empower that.
I just think, like you said earlier, the thing about GPAs and, these percentages or whatever, as human beings, we are not numbers on a page. So how we are going to learn to live into whatever it is we're going to do, those numbers are completely irrelevant by the time we hit our mid-20s. And yet we spend the bulk of our life until then just, it doesn't compute that people, I'm sure there are people who are teachers in America and doctors in America who were not the best students in there. It isn't the only thing that measures whether you're going to go on and be a successful person, whether you're going to go on. You can find a story to support any line of thinking. People who start slow and then get a lot better and surprise people who are always kind of bad and then they take a leap, or people who, never care about anything and then still stumble into being exactly what they want to be. There's not one path.
It's a bad indication.
And we worry way too much.
Was it the high school valedictorians nationwide have an average college GPA of 3.2. You go from the best kid in high school to being all right, pretty good, okay, in college. And I forget the numbers almost reverse. If you look at average college GPA of Fortune 500 CEOs.
Sure, those are skyrocketing, yeah.
No, they're or maybe it's their high school GPAs. I don't remember. It's the Fortune 500 CEOs. I have to look at the article again.
Or like C students,
but they're
right?
like they're like
That's
C,
what,
they're all
I've
like
read that
C
before
plus B
too.
minus students.
Yeah, they're terrible students.
Because learning to be good at school is not learning to be good for yourself.
Right.
Doing good in school is following directions, meeting deadlines, doing the other things that other people tell you. Being a good leader, running a company, making independent decisions.
Risky.
It's about taking risks and setting your own
outside
priorities.
of the box, all that stuff. Yeah.
And so like we really like, and again, it's accidental. Like I don't think it's a conspiracy theory that someone decided like let's make GPA the thing. It's just we accidentally end up competing in weird ways.
Right.
And they don't always set you up. And so what you do in school, what people not even how well you do, just what you do in school isn't even what you might end up doing. Like, okay, for you. So you said you were thinking about being a doctor.
And then I became an English major.
Then an English major.
I was an English and history major, philosophy minor. And
is that what you finished with?
Yep.
Okay.
And then went to graduate school. The joke was if I didn't figure out a plan, I was going to move to California, establish residency, and then go to Berkeley. That was like just sort of the joke with my friends. But I ended up going to graduate school for English for a year. And I assumed, based on how much I liked
English,
what I was...
like literature?
Literature, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, literature. I assumed, based on how much I liked it as I left college, that I would continue on and get a PhD. And then like my sort of vision at 22 was that I would get a PhD and teach in a university. Yeah. That's what I imagined.
That's what I wanted to do. My best college professor talked me out of it. He's like, you should teach high school, and here's why.
Yeah, see,
and no totally right.
Yeah, no one talked me out of it. I just got really sick of school.
Yeah.
And then Jim said, hey, I'm living in Hawaii. Why don't you come and live here? And I went, hey, that sounds like a good idea. And so I left.
Yeah.
And then the teaching thing came about because I needed a job in Honolulu, and I was not equipped for anything. And so I got a job at a private elementary school, and
so
just worked and worked and worked.
Do like teacher education?
Never until so I taught in Hawaii for a year. Then I taught in 3 years in a public school or a private school in San Diego, and was just on fire for teaching high school. So when we moved back to New York, I had to finish my master's in English, and then I took some education classes in order to get certified to teach in public school.
So you did enough for certification. Mm-hmm. Do you have like a degree in
education?
In education,
I have a master's in education.
So you have a master's in education.
That I did but I did it like after the fact.
So you have a master's in education and a master's in English, and then all right. So you're like intensely qualified.
I like school.
Yeah.
I do like school.
So
I've
that's
always
why
liked school. I like going to school. Like I've toyed with. And every once in a while I'll threaten Jim, like, maybe I'm going to go back and get an MFA, or maybe I'm going to go, like, finish a PhD. I mean, I'm pretty close to a PhD, whatever. But I just, instead I just go take, adult things, because I don't really want I don't, at this point, don't want to have to jump through the specific hoops of another degree. I'm just not that interested in that, but I really do, I think that idea of just wanting to keep learning stuff and finding things out, like that is something I have had always, and that I think would be the thing I would want to give kids is like just I don't care how you do it. You don't have to do it with a teacher. You don't have to do it in any formal way, but just want to stay aware in the world and want to stay engaged in the world, and don't want to think that you're going to graduate from school and then you never have to actually, think or learn stuff again. I had a friend who was a doctor and dealt with a whole bunch. She's a doctor, but she dealt with a whole bunch of sort of kind of depression things too. Right. And I remember talking to her once, and her sense of being a doctor was how discouraging it was that she always had more to like find out. Yeah. And she was like, "Doesn't that bother you?" And I was like, no, I actually like the idea that I'm constantly finding these kind of new things. Now, granted, it doesn't kill a person, and I don't miss a diagnosis because I don't have this new technique, but just the idea that
sometimes
it's changing
in you. Sometimes a kid can't write that essay.
I know. So I recognize I'm not trying to suggest it's quite the same level of stakes, but I still just think that some people seem to really embrace this notion that like there's always new stuff to find out, and that's exciting. Well, and then for other people, it's overwhelming because they can't ever manage it and keep up with it.
It's the intellectual glass half full. Like, I'm excited that my brain is not full yet.
Right, it's not full.
But I do understand how you might hit a point where you just feel exhausted that you haven't hit whatever level
Well,
is.
and when you said the thing earlier about, all the new systems that come or whatever, I mean, I don't feel bad for me because I certainly go, I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look at that. Yeah. And I know that no one is going to come knocking on my door and give me a bad time about it. But if I were just starting out in this profession and I was in my first couple of years and all of that stuff was getting thrown at me, that would feel overwhelming. In fact, I just had a conversation with one of our new teachers the other day, and I just said, why are you looking at every single, like, you should not be carrying journals home and looking at them. I'm like, you need to find a system, like, they need to read something in class. You don't have to look at all that. I'm like, you have to. And he goes, well, I want to do a good job. I go, I want you to do a good job too, but I want you to be here in 5 years. Right. And there's a reason that teachers burn out in 5 years. It's because if you do have this intensity about wanting to do a good job, you also have to figure out before you get resentful about the fact that it takes every second of your weekend, how are you going to do this in a way that's still meaningful, but it gets the job done, and you find that kind of balance.
I still struggle with grading wise, planning, prep, talking with kids. Like I still struggle with that, but that's something that talking with the lead mentor in the school, he sent something out asking like, what's the thing that you think is most important for people to know? And there's a million things, but and it's advice that I want to give that I almost don't know how to. I don't know how to finish it because I haven't fully figured it out, and I don't know if anyone ever really does well. But it's that you need help prioritizing because, like, I mean, on the one hand, when there's a bunch of new initiatives, but you're a new teacher, everything's new, so it's not really a new initiative. You're like, well, I guess that's just what I'm going to do.
Happens. Yeah.
The problem is when there are too many of those things coming or they're conflicting, it's hard to choose.
How do I know how to organize my day?
What's more or less important? Because it takes most people at least a couple of years to figure out, how much time goes into this activity versus this, the grading versus the contacting parents versus the working with the kid. And if you don't budget the time well, or at least budget your energies well, you do burn out because you tried to treat everything like it's equally important. And then it's later on you realize that some of it wasn't as important, but maybe some people don't make it that far. You get people who are done in the first 5 years or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the statistics are alarming.
They never figured out.
They never get to that place.
Oh, I didn't actually have to do that. Or that,
could have let that go.
That's a thing, yes, I could have done half of that and it would have been totally good enough.
Yep.
And I mean, not to promote like doing half of it, but you can only do so many new things or so many things at one time and do them well still. I
remember, again, this is the benefit of having done this, it's my 28th year. Yeah. I mean, my first couple of years, no one told me to do anything. There weren't any initiatives. Yeah. There was nothing. So I didn't, and I bet there weren't even here, right?
They're like, get in there and don't let them die.
Just go in and talk to them, and in fact, I remember my first giving seniors were taking British literature, and I remember we had done this scavenger hunt in the library, and they had all this history stuff, and we were, we had read, like some of the ballads and just, crazy early stuff, and I wrote a very traditional test, and I remember standing in my room, and I had, made it on the copy machine and stapled it all together. We didn't even have a copy machine that stapled for you. I had to staple it.
You were about to do the mimeograph.
I was thinking of mimeograph. Right? I was feeling it wasn't mimeograph, but it felt like that because it was so old fashioned and it was printed on a dot matrix printer. Right. I don't even think the Xerox machine we had would do front to back. Right. I mean, I think it was like single pages, and I had to staple them myself. And so I remember standing there watching, and here's 30 seniors, and they're all frantically writing all these answers, and I just went, and I'm kind of dancing in front of them. You guys are taking my test, and they looked at me and they go, "Yeah, you dummy! Like, of course we're taking it." And I'm like, "No, but like I wrote it, and now you're writing down answers." And it was just
your misery,
all of you. It was the coolest. Like, it was like watching that happen, and it was like that is the greatest thing ever. They actually like stuff transferred from me to you, and now and that was the coolest thing ever. And I still feel that way when I watch kids, do stuff, and I go, oh, they.
So it's like the light bulb turn on.
They
You're
get
like,
it.
all
Like,
right,
they say something really smart in seminar, or they do whatever, and I just think, I worry that you can get so caught up in, okay, did I do enough Newsella? Did I use no reading? Did I do this? Do that? Did I? That you don't actually get that kind of, sort of joy out of it. I mean, I think most of our people do.
You know what, though? You think about that, like, and maybe it'll be different with, say, kids who are in school now, elementary, middle, high school now. But I graduated high school right as the big standardized test push started. Mm-hmm. So, like, I think I took, like, a pilot test. It didn't count for anything. Mm-hmm. And we had to do in Pennsylvania, we had the senior project. You had, over the course of senior year, junior, senior year together, you had to do, like, 100 hours or more of work. Mm-hmm. And then you presented it to members of the school board, principal, teachers, and community. And fine, right? And, people did all kinds of cool stuff. And I think it was the next year, the year after, when the testing started and No Child Left Behind came right after it. But if you think about, like, wow, like, if we've set everything up for, like, standard expectations, here's the test, here's the expectations, mm-hmm. and you go through school very much learning not how to write a great paper, but how to write a good paper for that rubric.
Test, right.
Or for the, you check the boxes on your rubric. If you're going to have a period of, say, 15 to 20 years of kids who went through public school that way, mm-hmm. what kind of teachers are they going to be?
I worry.
Maybe the person who's trying to say, well, I need to do all of these things at least to this level. Mm-hmm. You're not going to skip some of them, or you're going to try to hit every piece of software.
Right.
Who said it? I don't remember if it was Dave, if it was somebody said something about, like, we need to teach kids something, critical thinking skills. Mm-hmm. Like, we need to make sure that they're active and engaged mm-hmm. and they're critical thinkers. And I said, well, that means that you probably need critical thinkers in the front of the room, which means that sometimes when you float a new thing that we're going to do as a school or you want to do, you almost need the teachers to push back. Like, mm-hmm. if everyone just smiles, nods, and does it. Right. I think we do. Right, but I think, if you have a staff where you expect the teachers to smile, nod, and do that mm-hmm. thing, how are the people who are quick to mm-hmm. that behavior
Absolutely.
ever going to inspire the argument or the critical thinking on the other side? And so if you have 20 years of kids who went through school, not that no critical thinking is going on, but where at least at certain points in it or certain years or certain subjects, we're just checking boxes and getting you through a standardized test, like that person as a teacher is not going to be well equipped to make those independent decisions we're talking about.
But I think I went to high school, again, at a time, I was in New York State, so we'd always had the Regents. Right. Not everyone took the Regents exams, so they didn't care whether everyone, no one was accountable for who passed and who didn't, technically, right? And I had a very, very traditional high school. I wouldn't say I wrote more than probably 4 papers in most of my entire high school. Seriously, like I don't think. We wrote them in history classes, English, not a lot. Like my English classes were. You taught Macbeth, and then you got whatever the notes were that the teachers gave you on Macbeth, and then you filled in the blanks that, So not a lot of that stuff. So where I came alive was in college, when it was like, oh, now I got to do this. So I do actually think, in a lot of ways, high school is preparing kids a little more, at least the things that I'm asking my students to do and that I'm watching them do, I think are much more like the kinds of stuff that and this is always how I've thought about high school, that I did when I was in college. Right. Let me create a scenario where they, talk to each other and people have different pieces of those things. And so that's the work that I've been doing. And I think there's more and more of that in high school than ever before. I just worry that because kids are taking so many of the classes that are these, high-level AP honors classes or whatever, that they can't really engage in it at the level that we would like them to, because there's too many of them happening. It was like I used to end the class with a project after the AP test, and it was like this movie, and it mashed up some books, and the kids had a great time with it. And then I realized a couple of years ago, oh wait, everyone gives these
project,
juniors
yeah.
these big projects. So mine wasn't fun anymore. It was the most fun, they said, of the one, but it took a lot of time.
Right.
And then I got these 4 other things. So it was just at the end of the year was this complete stress. I'm like,
Right.
okay, we're not doing it that way. So the project got moved to another part of the year, and now we do something much simpler. Like, just read this book and we'll do this little artist tea thing, and it's a much more
Right.
casual thing, because that's what I think
it's getting
happens is
loaded up elsewhere.
they just get pounded on
Yeah.
by everyone always saying high level expectations, high level expectations, high level expectations. Sometimes you could just, read and think about things.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to materialize into this big thing.
And this is also a place where, again, whether, what do we say is the average intelligence of the teacher, like, are we smart
Yeah.
or not or whatever, but like a rigorous class, like your class is hard because the expectations are high, not because you necessarily have a ton to do.
Right.
Like if your class is hard because of how much stuff there is,
Right.
at least the high school level, like maybe in college at certain points this might be different, but at the high school level, if the hardest thing about the class is how much stuff to do or how much time it takes,
Right.
that's not on average a very
Right.
good class.
No.
And I think sometimes when you have someone thinking about, say, an AP classroom, when you have someone in the room who, whether they know it or not, and maybe it's especially worse if they refuse to admit it, but if you look around the room and you realize that you are below the average intelligence in the room,
Yeah.
then the only thing you can do to make it hard for them is give them extra stuff.
Right. Right.
And so instead of challenging them with things that are just hard to think about,
Right.
let's read this book and have a thoughtful, good
Yeah.
conversation.
Right.
You start loading stuff.
Sure.
And you hit
Busy
them with
work.
as much stuff.
Yep.
And, and I think that's one of the ways that these kids get overwhelmed
They
is
do.
that you have people who, in certain ways, are out of their depth a little bit. And then
Yeah.
you load them up to make
Right.
it look hard.
Well, and should we, I don't know that just everyone should be teaching AP necessarily.
Right.
And I also think that, I'm a little worried, we haven't even talked about this, but, this notion that I think AP is looking to standardize, what it's doing a little bit. And my version of standardization is always that you're going to try to bring the bottom up, but the only way you're going to bring the bottom up is to bring the top down if you insist that everyone follow the same plan. There is no other way for that to happen.
Yeah.
Because somebody out there is doing stuff that's at a level above whatever it is you created.
Right.
There's no way for that mathematically not to be true. So you are going to force
You tie
people
everything
to
together,
do
yeah.
less than they would do otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's not reasonable to me. And I also don't think everyone needs the exact same class. Like, why does every experience need to be somehow homogeneous?
Yeah.
Kids in your class do not have to have the exact same experience as kids in my class, as kids in Tuscarora, as kids in Woodgrove. We do the best we can with the groups we have, and we need to trust that the art of teaching is going to get people where they need to go. If you put the right people in the bus and you let them drive the bus, then it should come out okay.
Just get on the bus.
We just obsess too much, I think, about how much sameness there needs to be in order for that to be fair. That's not reasonable. Life is not, you're not going to get that in college. Do you think every person teaching freshman composition in college is going to be doing it the same way? They don't even teach the same. They don't even come close to the same stuff.
Wildly different.
There was a guy who taught it with all graphic novels when I was in college.
Yeah.
It was, there's a million different ways to teach that and still do a good job.
Right. And that's where you start thinking about measuring outcomes. More and more colleges are going, or at least talking about going to like test optional, SAT, ACT, AP exams optional. And you think, man, that's okay if we didn't have so much grade inflation.
Right. That's true.
But since as the grades rise and then you give it, I used to hate the SATs, and more recently I started to like it. Not that I actually like the test, but I just don't know that kids' grades are actually reflecting what they're learning. And so, you need something that measures that. So, all right. So to that point, we've been doing this for a while. So two questions. The one you already sort of answered, but if you were given your own school, you have a building, you have a budget, you have a student body.
Okay.
Imagine like private school, very little oversight. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
What would the perfect school look like to you?
And it's high school.
You can do it. I mean, it makes sense to do high school, so that's what we teach. But you can pick a different level if you want.
No. High school would be so. One of the things, and this would be acknowledged difficult, but one of the things that I would try to find a way to do is to spend certain take certain months of the year where everyone in the school is working on some kind of a theme or a topic, and that generates across all of the disciplines, and there's like a break from all the other stuff that we're doing the rest of the time.
To do interdisciplinary.
Exactly. It's like genuine. So, like you hit winter time, whatever, and maybe it's like, okay, this year the Olympics. So for the next month, every single class is going to focus on some way or another the Olympics, and we're going to talk about how to make that all happen. So I would genuinely find disciplinary moments within, like, in time periods, and so it would be like, okay, stop, like no one gets to talk about whatever else they were doing for this. So that would be one thing that I would implement with the notion that would then help to build that sense of community and build some interest in certain areas, and then kids would, maybe some of that would filter out into what people did the rest of the time. So
kids
that would
develop
be one
expertise. Thing. If I need help, I
exactly.
can go to this kid
I can go
thing.
find this. I can go work on this. So it makes school look really different for, and maybe it would just be like 1 month each semester, something like that. Right, so that would be one thing. I would also absolutely try to find the idea of that balance between instruction that is, I need to give kids certain amounts of information, but I also need to pull back and then allow them to do things with that information, so that it would be expected that you wouldn't want to be a part of this school and you wouldn't be a teacher in this school if you weren't looking for alternatives to assessments, so that if you were giving any kind of an exam, it, I would try to get rid of that word as much as possible, but it would be, again, since I get to be king of the world and I get to start from scratch, we're going to start with the idea that we don't take tests here. We demonstrate our learning in ways that matter, and that teachers get a lot of say over what that looks like, but kids also engage in conversations about that, and there's some shape happening to that.
And if you have your budget and the rest, then
so I get to start
staffing is important.
So I get to hire the people who want to be on that journey with me. Those would be the kind of teachers I would want, who are not going to be connected to this idea of I have to get this discrete set of facts into the heads of kids. Instead, I have to present them with opportunities to work with my content in a way that becomes meaningful to them. And that sounds it's very abstract, but I've seen that at work. I've worked with a biology teacher who taught AP biology by spending the entire year building these models of the human systems and learning them and studying them, and the kids went and took the AP tests and did fine. So, they had to go do some work on their own for the things that were but you can unpack that together, and they still took that test at the end of the year. So I know that it is doable. It's just that we don't always know, I think, how to generate a place that feels safe enough for people to do that. And so this grant that I was a part of, that was what you did. You built a calendar at the beginning of the school year for how you were going to make your classroom student-centered 180 days of the year. What was that going to look like all the time? And so I come from a lot of practice, trying to think about that, and it's how I start with sort of everything that I do. So that would be how I do it.
Cool. All right, so last question, and this is probably harder for an English teacher than for a lot of other people I've asked. A couple of books or a couple of movies, and again, it could be educational, it could just be for pure enjoyment. If you got to tell everybody, hey, go read a couple things or watch it, whatever, either one, what do you find that you recommend to people frequently, or what do you like? So
lots and lots of books about creativity. So there's one that Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a couple years ago called Big Magic that I think is just really, really deeply insightful about how to live the life of being creative and how to encourage yourself and other people to do that. And it's on my list for AP juniors do it as a choice. And the kids who read it are always like, this is coming to college with me. I'm putting it on my book. So that book, I absolutely love that book. I also really love Writing Down the Bones, which is the book that got me Natalie Goldberg, and she was a Zen, she's still alive, Zen Buddhist sort of person off and on, and trained with people, and it's a very short passages about what it takes to, kind of engage with kind of writing like every day as a practice, almost like a Buddhist kind of thing, and it just gives a lot of insight into that. And it was the book for me. It's what I give to students, like really special students before they go away to college. Right. It is the book that started me on the journey of like now my 87 volumes of my own journal. Yeah. And so I just find it very, very insightful. So those two are super important to me.
The second one was Writing Down.
It's called Writing Down the Bones.
Writing Down the Bones. Okay.
Yep, by Natalie Goldberg. Yeah. And then, a lot of writing books. Yeah. And then, what else have I read recently that I thought was like really important? I have so many books that start running through. Those two are definitely. The Artist's Way is another one. That's Julia Cameron. Yeah. I've heard of that one. Yeah, and she talks about going on artist dates and writing like morning pages, like 3 pages a day. And I think, the world is kind of embracing this notion of, it's the current sort of fad to be sort of more mindful. But I really think that I've been thinking about that and working on that for 30 years, 29 years, I guess. And I think when you kind of have as a practice this idea of thinking about what's happened and recording it and what you may do next, and just being present in the process of having thoughts about what you do, it's super just grounding. Yeah. And I make kids keep day books, and I know they struggle to really live into the actual process of writing every day. And I know they don't do it every day. And so a lot of them, try to, game the system, and they write, like 17 entries in one night. And I know that they do it. And then, some kids write, ahead of time, and then I look at their journals and I go, you can't have dates from next week in your journal, but I'm going to be busy. I'm like, that is not the,
That's not the point,
and again, that comes back to what I think is wrong with education, right? So here it is, like, the process of this is allowing yourself to have 10 minutes a day to write, right? And you are so worried about me checking at them, and so you're completely not convinced by my theory at all, but you still want the credit for being convinced by my theory, so you're going to fake it. And that is not the point. The point is your life will be better if you will give yourself this habit.
Well, yeah, and it's like you do have 10 minutes. Like you're wasting 10 minutes.
Everyone has 10 minutes all over. Like put your phone down for 10 minutes and just jot something about whatever. So anyway, but I think any books that really have taken me down into why that is so significant and important matter to me.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sure there's stuff we didn't cover.
I'm sure.
And that just means I'm going to bother you, and we'll do this again at some point later on.
We didn't even talk about writing. Let's do that. Let's do one all about writing.
I was just going to say,
and publishing.
As a published author, we didn't even. Do you want to plug your book real quick?
Okay.
Come on. Go ahead.
Watershedding. It's available on Amazon, or from me. You can buy it from me.
I'll link it when I put this up.
I'll
put the link up for you.
I think it is still on Amazon or Finishing Line Press. So hopefully,
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
All right.
It was fun.